Hey there, this is Rish Outfield, and what am I doing up at 3:23 a.m. with a camera? Well, I am neither handsome nor charming, but I'm passionate, and I really like to read. I like to narrate audiobooks, and so I thought I would share with you my favorite bit from Stephen King's Pet Sematary. It's his 1983 novel. Uh, and this is the part that scared me the most. This is the part that scares me the most now as an adult. And I just thought I would share it with you. This is the part where the cat has died. Winston Churchill has died, and Lewis Creed has it in a hefty bag. And he follows Judd Crandall up into the woods to bury the cat. It's all very mysterious. He doesn't know what's going on, but he trusts the old man. Anyway, let's read it together, shall we? He walked down, looking straight ahead at the bright circle of Judd's light. Judd was standing there, waiting for him. Then he reached the bottom, and the exhilaration flared up in him like a shot of coal oil on embers. "We made it!" he shouted. He put the shovel down and clapped Judd on the shoulder. He remembered climbing an apple tree to the top fork, where it swayed in the wind like a ship's mast. He had not felt so young or so viscerally alive in 20 years or more. "Judd, we made it!"
You might see St. Elmo's fire, what the sailors call foo lights. It makes funny shapes, but it's nothing. If you should see some of those shapes and they bother you, just look the other way. You may hear sounds like voices, but they are the loons down south toward Prospect. The sound carries. It's funny."
"Loons?" Lewis said doubtfully. "This time of year?"
"Oh, yeah,"
Judd said again, and his voice was terribly bland and totally unreadable. For a moment, Lewis wished desperately he could see the old man's face again. That look. "Judd, where are we going? What the hell are we doing out here in the back of the beyond?"
"I'll tell you when we get there."
Judd turned away.
"Mind the tussocks."
They began to walk again, stepping from one broad hummock to the next. Lewis did not feel for them. His feet seemed to find them automatically, with no effort from him. He slipped only once, his left shoe breaking through a thin scum of ice and dripping into cold and somehow slimy standing water. He pulled it out quickly and went on, following Judd's bobbing light. That light, floating through the woods, brought back memories of the pirate tales he had liked to read as a boy. Evil men off to bury gold doubloons by the dark of the moon, and of course one of them would be tumbled into the pit on top of the chest, a bullet in his heart, because the pirates had believed, or so the authors of these lurid tales solemnly attested, that the dead comrade's ghost would remain there to guard the swag. "Except it's not treasure we've come to bury. Just my daughter's castrated cat." He felt wild laughter bubble up inside and stifled it. He did not hear any sounds like voices, nor did he see any St. Elmo's fire. But after stepping over half a dozen tussocks, he looked down and saw that his feet, calves, knees, and lower thighs had disappeared into a ground fog that was perfectly smooth, perfectly white, and perfectly opaque. It was like moving through the world's lightest drift of snow. The air seemed to have a quality of light in it now, and it was warmer. He could have sworn it. He could see Judd before him, moving steadily along, the blunt end of the pick hooked over his shoulder. The pick enhanced the illusion of a man intent on burying treasure. That crazy sense of exhilaration persisted, and he suddenly wondered if maybe Rachel was trying to call him, if back at the house the phone was ringing and ringing, making its rational, prosaic sound, if... He almost walked into Judd's back again. The old man had stopped in the middle of the path. His head was cocked to one side. His mouth was pursed and tense. Judd? What's... Shh. Lewis hushed, looking around uneasily. Here the ground mist was thinner, but he still couldn't see his own shoes. Then he heard crackling underbrush and breaking branches. Something was moving out there. Something big. He opened his mouth to ask Judd if it was a moose. Bear was the thought that actually crossed his mind. And then he closed it again. The sound carries, Judd had said. He cocked his head to one side in unconscious imitation of Judd, unaware that he was doing it, and listened. The sound seemed at first distant, then very close, moving away and then moving ominously toward them. Lewis felt the sweat on his forehead begin to trickle down his chapped cheeks. He shifted the hefty bag with Church's body in it from one hand to the other. His palm had dampened, and the green plastic seemed greasy, wanting to slide through his fist. Now the thing out there seemed to be so close that Lewis expected to see its shape at any moment, rising up on two legs, perhaps blotting out the stars with some unthought-of, immense and shaggy body. Bear was no longer what he was thinking of. Now he didn't know just what he was thinking of. Then it moved away and disappeared. Lewis opened his mouth again. The words, "What was that?" already on his tongue. Then a shrill, maniacal laugh came out of the darkness, rising and falling in hysterical cycles, loud, piercing, chilling. To Lewis it seemed that every joint in his body had frozen solid and that he had somehow gained weight, so much weight that if he turned to run, he would plunge down and out of sight in the swampy ground. The laughter rose, split into dry cackles like some rottenly friable chunk of rock along many fault lines. It reached the pitch of a scream, then sank into a guttural chuckling that might have become sobs before it faded out altogether. Somewhere there was a drip of water, and above them, like a steady river in a bed of sky, the monotonous whine of the wind. Otherwise, Little God Swamp was silent. Lewis began to shudder all over. His flesh, particularly that of his lower belly, began to creep. Yes, creep was the right word. His flesh actually seemed to be moving on his body. His mouth was totally dry. There seemed to be no spit at all left in it. Yet that feeling of exhilaration persisted, an unshakable lunacy. "What in Christ's name?" he whispered hoarsely to Judd. Judd turned to look at him, and in the dim light, Lewis thought the old man looked 120. There was no sign of that odd dancing light in his eyes now. His face was drawn, and there was stark terror in his eyes. But when he spoke, his voice was steady enough. "Just a loon," he said. "Come on, almost there." That's it. That's the bit maybe I'll still get in trouble for reading that much. So that's that. The book scared me. Like I said, all sorts of different parts of it scared me as a child. But this bit, it's my favorite part of the book. Now, at the end, Lewis goes up into the mountains again, into the woods, and he's alone this time. and he hears something moving through the trees, something immense. And the old man's voice comes back to him. It's only a loon, Lewis. Maybe I should have shared that bit too, but oh, I just love that. And my family has a cabin up in the woods, in the mountains, and I went there by myself. And it was summer, so I had all the windows open, and I heard an owl out there in one of the trees, but it wasn't the whoo, whoo kind of owl that you normally hear. There's a certain type of owl that makes a very distinctive call that goes a little bit like whoo, 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 whoo. And I heard that, and at first I was just like, wow, listen to that. I heard that in like a Disney record when I was a kid, and it went whoo, whoo, whoo. And suddenly this came back to me from Pet Sematary. And I started to think, that doesn't sound like an owl. That sounds like a person. I began to get really freaked out. And yeah, I'm not going to make myself sound cool. I ended up closing all of the windows. And I thought, I'll just be hot. I don't want to hear that all night long because my imagination just went wild, as it does. Anyhow, I hope you have enjoyed this little bit that I've shared with you. If you have, well, you are worth it. You are worth me missing a little bit of sleep over. If you didn't like it all that much, well, I'm sure I'll hear about it. Good night.